This is Linux Inlaws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35, or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. Welcome to Linux Inlaws, Season 1, Episode 66, I think. Martin, how are things? How are things?
Things are fine. We're having a small lull in the heat wave, so it's actually quite comfortable. What about yourself?
Can't complain. We have a lull too, as in just a small dip. The temperature has dropped to a balmy 33 degrees here. It was way hotter the previous day. But I reckon in comparison to Birmingham, this is more like the real summer, because now in Birmingham it's 23 degrees or something, right? That would be considered winter in Germany.
It's only 20 today.
Okay.
But yes, we had a few 30 days, which was sort of...
So time to put on the winter jacket once again.
Yep. Yeah.
Excellent.
Put the jumper on. Yep.
So how's the state of the kingdom, before I forget to ask?
Well, we had you a new leader at some point, but... Yeah.
So I heard, Boris is on the way out, right?
Well, yes, he has resigned, but yeah, he's manning the job for the time being until they got another one.
So your ruse finally worked. Excellent, Martin.
Well, it's not just
Martin,
mine. There's many people.
Hang on, you're supposed to say I had nothing to do with it. Any claim to the contrary is, of course, wrong.
It was entirely his own doing, sadly, or happily, whatever you want to call it.
I mean, if current press reports, or not current, but if previous press reports are anything to go by, I mean, if you're imposing a lockdown on the country, and then have a go yourself at parties left, right, and center, and then somebody leaks this, to be honest with you, I expected him to be gone way earlier than just now.
Yeah,
Lizzie is not in charge of affairs anymore, because in previous times, the ruler would have simply had such a subject decapitated at a place called the Tower of London, and that was that. End of story.
Yeah.
But with this democracy shenanigans, all the rest of it, you cannot do this anymore. Never mind, given the fact that the kingdom now is a so-called constitutional monarchy, if I recall this correctly.
Well, you could consider that the smartphone was his downfall, because you get all these people taking pictures these days, which means there's undeniable proof, right?
Indeed. So, Boris, if you're
listening, ban smartphones from your parties.
I think, given the fact that Martin has just fired marketing once again last week, feel free to apply.
Yes.
The stint may be short, but hey.
Can't be any worse.
You win some, you lose some.
Yeah.
But this is not about politics, but this is rather about open source software and the surrounding ecosystem. And today's subject is actually, Martin?
Cryptocurrencies?
Indeed, cryptocurrencies. So before we go into the details, maybe we should paint the picture a little bit with regards to what currencies are and why they're important.
Okay.
You want us enlightened about Maui and shells and all the rest of it, or?
Well, it was stuff like grain and things and sheep, wasn't it? To start with, it's like
yes, these would be
tradable items. Yeah.
These would be the so-called commodity-backed currencies. In ancient times, yes, you would have sheep, women, men, traded in exchange for
slaves,
goods and services. Exactly.
Yes.
And now, before we get any hate mail from the politically correct people, that was something called a joke.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yes. In ancient, I mean, the whole nature of a currency is essentially to provide a basis for the exchange of goods and services. So in ancient times, yes, gold, precious metals in general, gold, silver, all the rest of it. Maybe even commodities like, what's what I'm looking for? Cattle and some
Yeah,
other stuff.
grain and things like that, right?
Grain.
It's, yeah.
Exactly. Which was followed by something called a fiat currency,
Ah.
which is an entity that is not backed by a commodity, as a matter of fact, but rather
Ooh.
backed by an elusive thing called, normally known as a state. So a state can issue, or not the state, but rather the central bank of a country normally issues notes and other currency items, and this is normally known as a fiat currency.
Okay.
Yes.
So how do these states actually back these pieces of paper?
By their words. Hence the problem with fiat currencies.
Yeah.
If you get my drift.
Yeah. Okay. Carry on. Yeah.
I mean, this is why you have hyperinflation throughout history. The 30s in Germany would probably be the next example, or it was 1929, I can't remember. Details maybe in the show notes, where actually the value of money skyrocketed, and people, according to the tales of my great-grandfather.
Yes, it's probably not the value of money so much, is it? It's more the non-value of money.
Exactly. I mean, my great-grandfather, if I recall this correctly, told me lores about people using kind of small trolley carriers to kind of move money from their houses to a bank because it was simply too much for them to carry.
Yeah. No, I've got some German notes with like 10 billion Deutschmarks on them.
That's exactly it. Yes, I hope they're not stashed inside a book called My Struggle. In German, known as My Kampf.
Yeah. If they ever if they ever go back to the
it's in Germany, it's illegal to even be in possession of this. Yes.
Wow.
Sorry for the uninitiated. Mein Kampf, or My Struggle.
Why would it be illegal?
Because a guy called Adolf Hitler wrote it.
Yeah, but it's,
no, as a matter of fact,
a book.
Yes,
so
yes, it's a book, but it outlines essentially his vision upon which the Third Reich is based. Now, I'm not 100% correct because there is a commented edition which is not illegal in Germany. So you can buy this, you can read this, but the original uncommented edition, if I recall this correctly, is illegal.
Okay.
Possession, reading, and so forth.
Okay. Oh, I have to have a look through my bookshelf. Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyway, yeah, so I'm waiting for Germany to leave the euro and go back to the Deutschmark, and then I can trade in my $1 billion billion Deutschmark note.
Martin, don't hold your breath. It won't happen anytime soon, I suppose. No. Although you never know with the current shenanigans going on, gas prices, inflation, all the rest of it. Do not know. Yes, we're recording this in July of 2026. The war, unfortunately, hasn't ended yet.
No.
Oh dear, no, jokes aside, we're recording this in July of 2022, and the war, unfortunately, is still going on. So, but back to a much safer subject, namely currencies. So the idea behind fiat currencies is actually to provide a non-commodity backed entity that is still worth its salt in terms of you can use it as the basis to exchange goods and services. But in contrast to commodity-based backed currencies, it's not backed by gold or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was going to talk about that point because, as you say, the central banks used to cover their printed bits of paper with a bunch of gold in a large building, which they have pretty much all of them abandoned now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, because the trouble is basically you would have expanded that building a lot. If you want to put the gold into it.
But also they found out that if they actually sell this gold and just keep printing the money, it makes no difference.
Exactly. And the trouble is basically, and this is where then alchemy and other kind of black magic comes in, the amount of gold and other precious metals on this planet is limited. The amount of fiat currencies isn't.
No, you just need a printing press and some paper.
Exactly.
Yes.
and some smart people that will look after the amount of money being distributed to avoid concept like inflation and hyperinflation.
Well, you say that, but this is what the US have been doing for the last, I don't know, 10 years, I think. Just printing more money, right?
Well, they kept their interest pretty much down, yes.
Mm.
But of course, another very important property of a fiat currency is that it's regulated. Because typically there's only one entity in charge of producing and distributing that currency, which is typically, as Martin pointed out already, typically a central bank. You have this in the US. You have this in the US. It's called the Federal Reserve. You have this in Europe, it's the ECB, the European Central Bank, and you have this also in England, right? I think it's the name of this thing is called Boris Johnson. But maybe I'm wrong on this one, Martin. I don't live in the kingdom, so maybe you can enlighten us here.
No, we have one of these bank things as well. Yeah.
Okay. It's not the FCA; it's something else, right? It's England or the kingdom does have a central bank, no?
Yes, yeah.
But then all the splinter organizations like Scotland and Wales can issue their own currency, if I'm not completely mistaken.
Well, yes, they do, but they're all the same, interchangeable,
Okay.
and they're all pounds, and they have the same value, and they are all backed by the same entity. So it's not as though Scotland has its own central bank or anything like that.
Okay, so it's just a marketing ruse.
Yes. It's so to keep them,
Happy
and thinking they're independent, which they are.
Excellent, which of course they are. Just down to a couple of votes, and then they're regaining their independence, and then they can issue their own money, their real own money too. I think maybe so much for theory. Yes, but on to yes, and before I forget, normally, as I said, normally fiat currencies are regulated, and so the regulatory authority has a pretty good kind of grasp on how much money as in currency is being distributed in order to exactly avoid hyperinflation, kind of to control the interest and all the rest of it. This is the short version, of course. Economics, who are way more familiar with these subjects, can provide additional details. Will the corresponding links made in the show notes. In contrast to this, the cryptocurrencies do not expose these properties. But before we go into what a cryptocurrency really is, maybe we should shed some light on the history of this.
Yeah, can do.
The first real cryptocurrency basically came into existence about 13 years ago. It was called Bitcoin. There's a guy called Satoshi Nakamoto, if it really is a guy, because it's just an alias, I think, to some extent, who in the 2009 paper, and that detail will be in the show notes, described a system for a currency based on cryptological mechanisms.
Yeah.
And another of other mechanisms, essentially how the ledger is being built and how the transactions are verified and all the rest of it. So this is kind of the first, I think, real cryptocurrency. Funny enough, it's still the largest one in terms of people possessing Bitcoin and trading Bitcoin and all the rest of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, on the kind of on Nakamoto, the person, there's been some speculation and claims and all sorts in the last few years, right? There's
Indeed,
some Australian who claims he is him, but yeah, it is all highly contested. Yeah.
I mean, if you take a look at the original paper, the whole thing has a couple of interesting features built into it. For example, the limited supply of bitcoins, because according to the algorithm as described in the paper, this mining process of generating new bitcoins eventually will run out. So there's a limited cap, or there's a cap built into the algorithm that prevents, for example, exactly inflation, because you cannot generate more than n bitcoins at the end of the day floating through the system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, which makes it sound a bit like gold, really, doesn't it? Or any other, let's say, thing of no particular value that you can't do anything with, but people put their money into as a safe haven or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, not being if they don't want to use the fiat currency type systems.
Correct, yes. I mean, what is interesting with all these, I'm tempted to say, cryptocurrencies is actually the fact that after the original design of Bitcoin, there was a slew of cryptocurrencies being released.
Mm.
Most of them known as altcoins, if I'm completely mistaken.
Yeah, yes, I think that's the because they aren't Bitcoin, they're alternatives. That's what altcoins. Yeah.
I mean, most of them do have a couple of common traits. For example, there's a big transaction database called the ledger.
Mm-hmm.
Comparable to a bank ledger, this contains a record of all the transactions ever conducted with that currency.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you can imagine, such a ledger actually can be quite big. For example, if I take a look at and we're recording this on the 14th of July 2020, and I have a Bitcoin reference implementation running in the background, and at the moment the general ledger clocks into, or not the general ledger, but rather the ledger, the Bitcoin ledger itself clocks into at about 0.5 terabyte, at least according to my stats on the command line that I just did.
Okay.
And that ledger has, among other things, a couple of interesting properties, and I reckon that goes for any cryptocurrency, whether it's Dogecoin or Dogecoin as Martin calls it.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah.
Ethereum, all the rest of it. This ledger essentially, or a transaction, consists of a couple of cryptographic keys, a timestamp, and an amount, if I recall this
Well,
correctly.
it's a from and a to address, right?
Yes, the keys, the public keys, I think, are involved in this, but needless to say, because it's a public key infrastructure, you also need a private key. And the private keys, in addition to some other information, actually make up something called a wallet that you can use to store your bitcoins in. So if you ever lose that wallet, these bitcoins may be gone, because these contain the keys that you need in order to sell the amount attached to them.
Well, when you say sell, what do you mean by sell?
As in selling the contents of the wallet. If you want to basically say, if you have a wallet on your smartphone. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, this is the trouble with any cryptocurrency right now, is that they're not really legal tender, except that some organizations are starting to accept them, I believe.
Well, Starbucks, maybe I'm wrong, but hang on, there's a whole country called Venezuela, or is it something else?
El Salvador, I think.
El Salvador, yes, pardon, you're right. El Salvador accepted them as a legal currency, if I'm not completely mistaken.
Yeah,
As a
you're
legal
right.
tender.
Yeah. Yep.
Other countries, including, for example, China, actually banned any cryptocurrency related activities, whether it's mining, whether it's, and we're going to go into what mining is in a minute, and of course also trading, but there are places on this planet, and I can recall seeing at least a coffee shop or two in Denmark, of all places, that actually accepts or accepted bitcoins. And
Yeah,
for example,
there was also some place in Japan, right? They were quite
yes.
early adopters of this, but yeah.
And if you go to any VPN provider, chances are that they also will accept bitcoins.
Okay.
Needless to say,
Not to mention the drug lords and other.
I was just about to talk about dark markets, Martin. Funny enough,
other
so
people who
the
want to
likes
be
of
non-traceable
exactly.
transactions.
So the likes of Silk Road, for the younger ones of our listeners, Silk Road was a so-called, what's called dark market. No, what's it called, Martin?
Illegal. It was more.
No,
Yeah.
a
It was under
darknet
that. It was,
marketplace,
yes.
exactly.
Thank you.
Yes,
That's
sorry.
the one. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So a darknet marketplace is essentially a place where illegal goods and services are being traded. And
Yeah.
more often than not, the accepted currency for this is actually Bitcoin.
You may want to just mention briefly what a dark net is for those who are not familiar with this. Probably everybody is, but yeah, just in case.
The darknet is essentially basically a portion of the internet where you need light to serve and kind of do things. Hence the notion.
I see. If we ignore this, Chris's joke, since Chris actually runs his own Tor servers, I believe.
Yes, but only relays.
Oh, okay.
Martin, in that case, why don't you provide a layman's interpretation of what a darknet is?
Yeah. Well, in short, it is really based on Tor routers that mean that you aren't traceable. As in normal network communication has these source and destination IPs and so on. And anyway, this is probably a topic for another episode. But
indeed, what is Tor exactly?
Yeah. So, but to put it simply, yeah, you are. It is a portion of the internet where IP addresses don't exist as such, but simply. So traceability is in theory not possible.
Yes. And the name, I think, comes from the fact that normal search engines cannot index that darknet for said reasons. I think this is where the name originally comes from.
Okay.
But I may be wrong.
Okay.
So if you have a Tor browser, of course, you only need the Onion address. And as I said, there will be an upcoming show on the Onion router network, also known as Tor. All you need is actually the Tor address of that marketplace.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't remember seeing this in the schedule. Sorry, carry
on. Not yet, Martin, not yet. Okay. It'll be there in a minute or two.
All right. Carry on.
So, yes, so all you need is actually the Tor address of that marketplace and a couple of Bitcoins, and then you can give it a go. Mm-hmm. And needless to say, kids, because, funny enough, how can I put this diplomatically? Most legal enforcement agencies have gotten wind of these marketplaces. So if you want to buy your kilo of Coke, you want to make sure that you're talking to a legit trader, so to speak.
A legitimate, illegal trader.
Exactly. And not to some fake trader, actually, who is, at the end of the day, a member of the law enforcement community. Mm-hmm. Because in that case, as in real life, you may encounter problems very soon. Yep. No, jokes aside. I think especially most of the time these marketplaces would be in the business of trading or facilitating trading of highly illegal goods and services and all the rest of it. So, but you see, there's actually a big misconception here about Bitcoins and untraceability because, yes. So because you have a distributed ledger, as in you have a large database that is attached to any transaction floating through the network, because that's exactly what a general distributed ledger is.
Yeah, it's probably worth emphasizing this distributed nature, right? It's unlike, it's not a central database as such. It's anybody can run a copy of the transactions.
Yes. So
let's call it. Yep.
Exactly. So on one of my servers, actually, with enough disk space, there is this Bitcoin reference implementation running, giving me access and giving my wallets access to the Bitcoin network right then and right there. And as I said, this ledger clocks in. This is the local copy of that ledger on my hard disk. That clocks in now at almost half a terabyte.
Okay. And why would you run such a ledger?
Because I want to have instant access to the Bitcoin network rather than going through an exchange or something.
Okay, fair enough. Well, so what is an exchange?
Very good question, actually, Martin. An exchange is a trading platform. Because not all people, well, I mean, imagine the fact that, or imagine the situation that you don't have Bitcoins, but you want to have some. What you do? I mean, of course, you could go to a Darknet marketplace and sell your grandmother if you find a buyer for this, and then have some bitcoins. But of course, there are much more legal ways to do this.
Okay.
So, for example, you could go to an exchange that simply takes your fiat currency, as in your euros, your dollars, your pounds, whatever, and gives you bitcoins for this. Bitcoin.de is such a marketplace. Needless to say, these marketplaces are, because they have a physical location and they trade with fiat currencies, they would be under the regulation of the central, or of the regulatory body, let's put it this way, of the country they're residing in. And also, as quite a few criminals have found out, initially anyway, Bitcoin was perceived as a good way to launder money. So that's exactly what put these marketplaces onto the radar of the law enforcement agencies. So if you now, for example, want to open an account at a marketplace here in Germany, say bitcoin.de or something like this, you have to, of course, like with an ordinary, if you want to, like similar to opening an ordinary account at a normal bank, you do have to provide proof of identity. You have to provide your verified home address and all the rest of it. More often than not, you would have to provide a photo ID, because otherwise you won't be able to open an account on that marketplace, on that exchange for that matter.
Okay, so instead you're running your own ledger, and so you don't have to do this, right?
Well, the wallets associated with that server instance already contain Bitcoin that I, of course, bought at an exchange.
But
okay. It's now basically, you see, basically if you wanna trade using Bitcoins, well, you can go through an official exchange, but that has delays associated with it, or you can simply run your Bitcoin reference implementation that gives you access to the network then and there. So if you want to send somebody Bitcoins, you can simply use that tool. Somebody sends you a destination address, source address you generate on the fly, you attach the amount to it, and simply inject that transaction into the running Bitcoin reference implementation, so that you don't have to go through a third-party provider that, of course, also charges money.
Okay. Right.
So we've covered the history. We covered bits and pieces of what cryptocurrencies truly are. Essentially, a bunch of keys, a money value attached, a currency value attached to it, as a value transaction attached to it. Now, maybe Martin, you're running a miner, right? If I'm not completely mistaken, or you used to run a miner.
Yeah.
As in not a small kid, but rather a miner, as in you mine cryptocurrencies. Why don't you explain what a miner does and why it's important?
Well, I guess that goes back a little bit. If we go back a step, then, well, if you think about your mining in the olden days,
like kids in mines, like your
well,
children or something.
yeah, I mean, valuable goods didn't just sort of float by, right? They had to be dug out of the soil, or people had to dig holes in the ground to try and find them, and so on. Whether it's gold or coal or whatever it is, right? So similarly, if we go back to the concept of Bitcoin, which is based on a technology called blockchain, right? These blocks have to be mined, as the word is used in analogy to the digging people. Yeah, so a miner is a guy who does the mining bit. In this case, someone with a PC, usually with a bunch of graphics cards, because they're very good at calculating hashes, and because with something like Bitcoin, the whole let's say mining concept is based on the fastest guy who finds it first wins, right? So I think you're probably familiar with all the issues around its energy consumption around Bitcoin and mining in general. But doing any kind of crypto mining is resource intensive by definition, because if it was too easy, then it would be too quick, for example. And yeah, but the upshot is that people with many hardwares or big and fast hardware are generally finding more blocks, right? Or you can get lucky.
Exactly,
In a
Martin. Spot
quick
on.
summary.
And exactly, going into a little bit more technical detail, essentially
Mm.
what mining is, and I reckon, and Martin, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just using Bitcoin as an example,
Sure.
but Ethereum works pretty much the same way.
Mm.
Essentially, mining is confirming a couple of transactions. In the
Well,
case of
more than a couple. It's a block of transactions.
exactly, so every 10 minutes, to be precise, at least on the Bitcoin blockchain, the transactions are being confirmed.
Yep.
And this is something called a proof of work, POW. In terms of a transaction consists, as explained just a minute ago, a transaction consists of a couple of hashes, in addition to some other meta information. And what the miners essentially do is they make sure that any transaction on that blockchain is valid. Plus, in fact, that timestamps are being carried forward. So, meaning that the miners are responsible to a certain extent to ensure that double spending doesn't take place. Now, what is double spending? Essentially, double spending is an illegal action where you, to put it that way, if that was possible, where you essentially would spend a Bitcoin amount twice, as in you would generate two sets of hashes.
Yeah, the same amount, right? Which you don't have. Let's put it that way. I mean, you can obviously spend 50 Bitcoins twice, but they're not the same Bitcoins.
Well, you see, this is exactly it, Martin.
Yeah.
You would generate the same hashes with attached to the same amount. But because timestamps are included and the miners essentially prove through something called a proof of work, and details will be in the show notes. The stuff and the details are quite mathematical, so I won't go into that level of technical detail. Ensure that only a set of valid transactions can enter the blockchain. Because in combination with the timestamps, you cannot roll back a transaction. So if you would try to spend a Bitcoin amount twice, it would A, be detected, and B, it wouldn't be possible.
Yeah, well, you touched upon an interesting point there. I mean, it's this has to be approved by a majority of the let's say the nodes in the network as well, right? It's not that
Correct, yes.
one miner can say, "Oh, yeah, your transaction's valid." It's
hence the consensus protocol. The Byzantine generals ring a bell, but as I said, we won't go into the level of detail. There will be a couple of links in the show notes, so people, if you want to max yourself out, just follow these links. The original idea is actually quite well described. Described quite well. Anyway, it doesn't matter. In Sartori's original or primeval paper.
I don't think it's about primeval.
Sorry, what's that? Is that sort of the word I'm looking for?
Primeval is no.
Original. Let's stick to original.
Yeah.
Paper.
Primeval is before the dawn of man, right? Yeah. Anyway,
yes, and plus also the nature of these proofs of work ensure that the amount of bitcoins, and I'm just sticking to Bitcoin as an example, that the number of bitcoins will remain finite. Finite. In terms of it won't grow forever, because at the current rate, I think 2042 is full stop. Is in terms of then the whole mining process will end. After which, and again, the details are in the paper. After which, the miners will only get a cut of the transactions. In terms of, in contrast to getting real newly minted bitcoins, as it is the case now.
What's the value they're getting these days?
Good question.
It
used to be 1 point something bitcoins, but
I think
that's
it was
a fortune
reduced,
these days.
Yeah, it keeps being reduced, right? Anyway, don't worry about it. Yeah, so you mentioned proof of work. I believe there are other methods as well. Do you have any examples?
I don't.
Okay.
But essentially, proof of work is, well, breaking it down to a mathematical concept is essentially it's determining a set of hashes that is smaller than the original, which is mathematical computing intensive.
Well, it's just guessing really. You're guessing the outcome of a hash, right? Which you don't know the input for. So you're and if
Well, that's the exact nature of the POW.
yeah.
And that doesn't stand for prisoner of war for a change. I'm joking.
Not right now. Anyway, the other one is proof of stake, right? Which is a slightly different way of verifying. But yeah, we don't have to worry about these things too much.
I'm just using Bitcoin example, but given the fact that you are the unknown Ethereum miner on the planet that is able to buy whole countries with that sort of cash, I reckon in Ethereum.
I don't think any countries run on
right?
Ethereum right now.
Not yet, no.
Well,
this
Ethereum,
is, full disclosure. This is the reason why Mr. Visser has to engage something called exchanges.
Well, Ethereum is a more modern interpretation of the blockchain, but I guess the main thing that we ought to also address is kind of the transaction rates that because you could spend the whole podcast on Ethereum, right? There's so many things about it, and the fork, and this and that, the other, and the DAOs, and so on. So I think what's relevant what we should probably tackle in this episode is the TPS issue and let's say the energy issue, right? That comes with these things.
Since all Greater's calls are routed to you, Martin, why don't you give it a shot? Because I simply cannot deal with that sort of stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know if you ever came across this, but so Bitcoin has a limit of, guess how many transactions per second?
A couple of thousand, right? Not more than that.
7.
Fair enough.
As a payment technology, it's a little bit flawed. Let's put it that way. In contrast, if you think like any sort of credit card company out there, they deal with a lot more, right? So, so this is one of the things that certain crypto technologies try to address. One of the being Ethereum, which is after finally Ethereum 2 will be sorted, it will be able to do up to 24,000 a second.
So what's the difference between Ethereum and Ethereum 2?
Well, Ethereum 2 is where they will have sharded change, so blockchains, right? So if you have one chain and you've got to all work on that one, then yes, the transaction rate is obviously limited by that. Whereas if you can have many of them, you essentially do it in parallel. So which comes with its own complications, but yeah.
Hence the term shards, okay, like in the database sense. Okay,
yeah,
got it.
Indeed, yeah. But it's well overdue. In fact, it's because it's quite a complex piece of to do all that. So I mean, there are some other ones that have increased this as well. There's so many of these things out there anyway, and they're all trying to solve different issues, problems with original Bitcoin, as well as try to improve on certain things. I don't know if you remember one of the episodes I mentioned a technology called Nerva. Okay, the biggest issue with lots of these mining activities is that they are very suited to GPU cards because of the nature of the calculations that need to be done. So what happened was that everybody started buying all the GPU cards in the world, and you can find one for a lot of money. I don't know if you've ever seen the pictures of some of these mining operations, but even let's say GPU-based laptops weren't safe.
Okay.
So So Nova is actually built in some bits in the code that mean that you cannot running it on a GPU would have no advantage. So you can just do CPU mining instead,
No,
making it
refresh my
available.
memory. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was one of the reasons why China banned all cryptocurrency, especially Bitcoin transactions, because of the energy consumption. No.
Energy consumption, yes, correct. Yes. Well, China were if not the biggest, one of the biggest single countries that started doing the mining.
Mining haven comes to mind
on an industrial scale. But yeah, I mean, others are places like the Nordics, right? Because what you can do is you can shove your mining farm in some cold underground bunker where you don't have to spend a lot of energy cooling stuff. So therefore, because the trade-off is clearly, you're spending energy to do your mining, but you got to pay for this as well. So somewhere where there's cheap electricity and somewhere where you don't have huge cooling costs is a ideal place for mining. Clearly, one of them being Iceland.
But you see, the trouble with Iceland is, of course, if you just dig deep enough, you will hit some thermal energy source.
Yes,
and
yes,
if
you want to avoid
you
that
go
bit.
beyond this, exactly. Martin, and if
Don't
you
dig
do
too far.
exactly, you don't want to be present when it all blows up.
No, that's very true.
So kids, careful out there. Don't do your mining in Iceland unless you know what you're doing.
So yeah, those are some of the. What else were we talking about? However, since
in an Ethereum context, you want to touch on smart contracts while we're at it?
Can do. Yeah.
Go ahead, Martin. So
okay.
I don't have to do all the talking.
Well, you can do it as well if you want to. But,
I know. Just go ahead, Martin. You're the crypto expert among the two of us.
Not really. Where were we? Yeah, smart contracts. So, well, you have. You're renting an apartment, aren't you? So you
Hasn't changed.
Yes. So you have a paper contract, right?
Yes.
So the idea behind smart contracts. Well, let's start with the idea, right? The idea behind smart contracts is that it's an automatically enforced contract to start with. So let's say you're renting your apartment, it has some electronic locks. The contract itself has rules in them. So a rule could be Chris pays, I don't know, €1,000 a month for his apartment. If he doesn't pay, he can't get into his apartment, right? So this is that's the idea behind the smart contract, is that they are automatic. Once it's on the blockchain, it cannot be changed, and it is automatically enforced depending on the rules that are in it, right? So the rules are part of the contract itself. That is written in stone on the blockchain. So
rather than an amount, it's just actually a piece of software, more or less.
Correct. It is a piece of software. Yes. And so the idea behind that is that you're doing away with lawyers and all sorts of complications like that. But obviously, the downside is that if you miss a payment, you can't get into your house. Whereas with a normal contract and a landlord, you can say, "Oh, can you please open my door because my phone dropped in the toilet, so I can pay you," or something like that. So that's one of the downside of these things. But in theory, the nice thing is that there is no, again, a part of decentralization and getting rid of middlemen like banks and lawyers and stuff like that. That's the whole idea about all these. Yeah.
The people that gobble up the money in between. Yes.
Yes. Indeed. So that was one of the the things that Ethereum introduced, as well as there's all these things like smart apps and so on that things like EOS introduced and so on. However, in terms of mainstream adoption, yeah, there isn't, apart from El Salvador, there hasn't been much in daily life that has changed yet for most people. So
So we
that
cover the
kind of,
background.
yeah.
Yes.
So
We
that
cover
kind
the
of
background.
begs the question: what is the use or the point of cryptocurrencies, in your opinion?
Indeed, yes. Well, money laundering comes to mind big time. We tackled this already.
Yes.
So, kids, if you want to launder money, don't do it through Bitcoin, just in case. Because if you don't do it through Tor or other anonymization mechanisms, it can be traced. Unlike cash, in terms of fiat currencies that cannot be traced if done correctly, don't use
Yes.
Bitcoins or cryptocurrencies for money laundering
The
and
only
any
problem
associated
with
activities.
cash, of course, is that it needs physical transportation in comparison, and storage and so on.
But yeah, that's the only drawback.
So, if you have a pile of cash in your house and Buddha comes in, he will take your pile of cash, but he will not take your wallet, right? Well, your Bitcoin wallet or your
True, but you
wallet.
see, if you have crocodiles in the basement that guard that vault, never mind some other deterrents, let's put it this way,
Okay.
hiding huge amounts of cash is not an issue.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know you had
And
crocodiles in Frankfurt, but hey,
but
you live and learn.
Martin, there's a famous documentary basically called Jurassic Park. I don't know if that rings a bell. There was this weird scientist that brought back dinosaurs.
Yes.
And Martin, between you and me, because nobody else is listening anyway, this was just the tip of the iceberg. So crocodiles are just the harmless variety here. The possibilities, I wouldn't say are endless, but they can be.
You must have a pretty big basement. Anyway.
I can't really talk about the details.
Okay, fair enough.
So the point that I'm making here is actually there are means and ways that where cash actually in your house can be safeguarded quite well. It's just a matter of putting a tiny fraction of that cash into proper research.
Yeah, that's fair.
What else is there? Yes, the adoption of cryptocurrencies as a general currency. You'll see this actually in the likes of El Salvador and all the rest of them. But on the other side, you have countries like China that are completely banning crypto-based transactions. And then you have Europe, which is somewhere in between.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure what China are actually doing in this terms, but they can't really ban crypto transactions, right? I suppose they could ban mining as such, but even then, how would you? I suppose the bigger mining organizations would draw a lot of power, so they're quite easy to spot.
But you see, if you ban all exchanges from a country, you have to resort to external marketplaces if you want to trade your cryptocurrencies.
Yeah. Yes, I guess in China they have their restricted
exactly,
internet.
and unless you use kind of tumblers, you can monitor the cash flows coming from foreign exchanges, and that's exactly what China does.
Okay.
So even if you trade your cryptocurrencies on the foreign marketplace, if the amount is just large enough, the regulatory authorities will notice, and that's exactly the point of time when you are in hot water.
Well, they still have to trace you, though. I suppose they're pretty good at that in China.
Well, in that case, kids, if you want to do it through China, don't resort to bank accounts. Word of advice. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could always give the cash to something called the Linux Inlaws. The email address is sponsor at linuxinlaws.eu.
Cash or crypto.
In case you're wondering, yes.
No
or
problem
crypto
at all.
or currencies accepted. No worries.
Yes. So yeah. What are we? Well, I guess if we talk about mainstream adoption, the biggest mainstream adoption I think we've seen is people using it as an investment vehicle rather than anything else.
People out there want to make a quick buck because cryptocurrencies and especially Bitcoin are highly volatile. I mean, about October, September timeframe last year, or was it even November? I can't remember. Bitcoin was clocking in at 65 grand or something like this as in US dollars per Bitcoin, and now it's down to about 20. So you're talking about the third within about 8 months or something like this.
Yeah, but if you think about it from the point of view of the initial years in the early 2010s, then there was the guy who paid 10 bitcoins for a pizza or something, wasn't he? I can't remember who he was, but famous story.
The guy with the lost hard drive and who basically tried to secure a
legal case. Yeah. Rubbish dump. Yes.
Rubbish dump. Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Because he apparently suspected that the hard drive was on this was in this rubbish dump. And I reckon you're talking about an acre or two. I don't know, but large anyway.
So, okay, well, why don't you explain to listeners why this hard drive is of relevance?
Well, if you have a wallet on your hard drive, this is where your hashes are in terms of the transaction or the bitcoins that are stored in your wallet.
So why
as
would
we touched upon before?
Put it on
because without that wallet, you cannot trade these bitcoins. These wallets contain your hashes that are attached to this amount.
Yeah. So actually, there are many different wallets out there as well, right? Okay.
I'm just talking about a Bitcoin wallet. That's all.
Yeah. No, well, a crypto. It doesn't have to be a Bitcoin wallet. It could be.
True, but in that case, it actually was a Bitcoin wallet.
Yes, yeah, that usually is. But yeah. So
you can store your Bitcoin wallet wherever you want. Actually, you can also print out the hashes.
Yes,
this is actually what some people do.
It's just the private keys are in there, right?
Exactly, for cold storage. That's exactly it, Martin. Yes.
Yes. So okay, let's say Chris has 10 bitcoins. Where can he keep them? Apart from his basement.
Well, he can buy probably a small Central American country with this in about 5 years' time, when Bitcoin finally rebounds, I suppose. No, I can keep it on the phone. I can of course print out the hashes. I can keep them in a piece of data called a file, in terms of a file on an ordinary hard disk drive. Or there are also something called hardware wallets. Ledger is probably being the best example, where you actually can store them on a USB stick-like device, which is hardened in terms of software and access and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So if you take the Ledger as an example, it's got it with a pin. It's the software is hardened. And it's extra secure, as in it contains a piece of crypto hardware that cannot be broken easily if the manufacturer's specifications are anything to go by. Details maybe in the show notes.
Yep. Yeah. However, then you're back to a physical device, right? So
it's essentially a USB key, yes, with a little bit of software on it and a display. But the beauty is, it supports multiple cryptocurrencies. So it's Bitcoins, it's Ethereum, and it allows you to install so-called apps. And Ledger, if you want to send us money, the email address is linux.sponsor.eu.
Or even one of these devices with some stuff on it.
Yes, always an option, people. But anything less than 1 Bitcoin probably won't be accepted. I'm joking.
Well, we can think about it. Yeah. Not a problem.
No, jokes aside. I'm just using Ledger as one example. Of course, there are alternatives available. The thing is, basically, most of these USB-like devices or USB stick-like devices support multiple currencies. For example, a Ledger allows you to upload a couple of applications that handle your different cryptocurrencies for you. The Ledger in my possession is actually able to handle Ethereum, Bitcoin, and some other altcoins.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the wallet doesn't hold any cryptocurrency as such, right? It's the the fact that you've done a transaction which is recorded on the blockchain means that your destination address owns that currency.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's essentially the hashes with the metadata attached, and the metadata actually holds the amount.
Yeah.
Or contains the amount. Yes, that's what works.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, wallets are a good point.
So Martin, where is this going?
Where's this going? Well, okay. So the whole kind of historical concept was about decentralization, right, and cutting out the middlemen.
And beating the system, exactly, yes.
Yes. Which then turned into all the let's say shady characters finding a very handy use for this.
As usual.
Yes. So where's it going? I mean, the whole decentralization bit is great, but if we think about societies and we have laws for reasons, right? And the people controlling these things. So this is where that kind of whole decentralization piece falls down a little bit. It's like, so someone steals your Bitcoin, what are you going to do about it? Nothing, right? Whereas if someone empties your bank account, you have a bank that says, there you go, you have your money back because our security was rubbish. Or you made a mistake, whatever it is, right? So yeah, you can argue both sides of that argument, right?
Yeah, Martin, but I reckon the amount of people that will go to the police after their cash was stolen that has come from something called laundered money will be quite limited.
Yes, they will probably resort to other measures. But
exactly. Depending of the amount that was stolen. So kids, if you want to steal some cash as a physical cash from somebody, you want to make sure that you suss out your target before, because otherwise there will be consequences.
But
and
yes,
I'm not talking about the easy ones like a jail sentence. So I'm talking about much more drastic issues. As in, you may lose your life.
Yes, either way, it's not advisable.
Exactly. Kids
but
don't steal in the
in-laws
first place. No, exactly. No, I'm just saying, kids don't steal.
Indeed.
It's as simple as that.
Kids or
whether from crooks or not, it doesn't matter.
No. Well, yes, there are. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of
no. I mean, jokes aside, Martin. I as you said, there are a couple of sides to the whole thing. Never mind China banning the whole thing or not, and the volatility that is out there in the market. I think cryptocurrencies are here to stay. For starters.
Yes.
But it really depends on the use case where you see a significant adoption going forward.
Well,
so, for example,
you see the whole argument from the all the national banks, right? They're all arguing, should we ban it or adopt it, or what should we do with it, all kind of stuff. And the argument is usually that it's not regulated, right? So.
Yeah, but Martin, this is the old guild argument, no? I mean, if you have a guild of sorts, say for example, you're in the business of making cars, you establish a guild like the VDA, the German Association of
Guild with a D, you mean?
Yes, sorry, guild with a D, as in the trading association. Yes, like the VDA, the German Car Makers Association. Needless to say, this is a regulatory body in itself, because what guilds prevent, and that hasn't really changed over the last couple of millennia, is actually competition, as in keeping them at bay. So I fully get the idea that most central banks wouldn't support cryptocurrencies because A, it's competition, and B, it cannot be regulated from their perspective. Whereas hard cash can, in terms of the amount of cash in distribution
and stuff, right?
and whatever, and the amount of cash you print and all the rest of it. Cryptocurrencies do not fall into that roster. And that's exactly the reason why most central banks are not exactly in favor of cryptocurrencies. Simple as that. Because at the end of the day, for them, from their perspective, it's competition.
Yeah, that's yeah. And you could also argue that in some ways, even if they are decentralized and stuff, there are examples of the communities looking after themselves in for example, the case of the DAO hacker out for Ethereum, where they just decided to do a fork and reverse the transaction because it was some guy who nicked a lot of money. So.
Martin, because you're close to this, and if you want to go into the details, I mean, explain what you can about this.
Well,
If you
it's
want to leave it at that, that's okay too.
quite a long story.
So details may or may not be in the show notes, depending
Yeah,
on Martin's level of privacy.
it's quite well known this one. But yeah, so the point was that even the miners and the majority that looks after a cryptocurrency can do something about it, right? Even if things may seem like but they can do something. The only thing they can do is obviously fork the chain because the chain is immutable. But yeah.
Or if they
Long
want to do
story.
this, they have to control it. They have to do it in a controlled fashion, like the Bitcoin fork, because at some stage there was a change. There was a change in the algorithm, but the
Okay.
community decided
Hmm.
on when and how to fork this
Okay.
to ensure that the blockchain, never mind the change in the algorithm, stays
Hmm.
intact. And
Hmm.
that's exactly the democratic approach to something called cryptocurrencies.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, the community decides because through adoption, and this is where the nicely back a segue into open source. Because if you take a look at the Bitcoin reference implementation, it's a C++ code based on GitHub. Simple as that. You
Hmm.
clone it, you compile it, you run it, and then
Okay.
you're part of the community. So in contrast to a central bank, the community decides. Now, you could make the case that a central bank has a community too. But in
Hmm.
contrast to the cryptocurrency community, this whole thing is very controlled because a central bank decides who's going to be part of the community, whereas you, being a enthusiast or whatever you want to call it, or whatever you want to self
Hmm.
call, or whatever you yourself want to call yourself. Is that making sense? Probably not. Whatever you want to call yourself. Sorry. Yes. Long day.
Okay.
You can join the community, and then through your contributions, you can make that change or not.
Hmm.
Whereas a central bank is regulated and calls the shots on that level.
Hmm.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yes. Good point indeed.
So and this is the very core meaning of open source at the very center. You decide what goes and what doesn't.
Yep.
In contrast to this,
Well, obviously not
somebody
you
else doesn't.
not you by yourself, right? But yeah, you at least have a vote. Whereas,
Exactly. Before
okay,
people start wondering what the heck the open source angle is on this one.
all code's open source. Yeah. And I mean the principles are similar as well, right? So
Yes.
it's very relevant. You ask me. Okay. Anything
So,
else?
any parting thoughts before we wrap this up?
Any parting thoughts? Well, I guess one parting thought is that I was in Israel in 2015, I think, and I was talking to a taxi driver and said, "Oh, yeah, I've bought, I don't know, 10,000 bitcoins or something because it's going to be brilliant." So, anyway, so he was right and I wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah,
Have you
so
kept tabs
like
on him
I don't
or
know his
her?
name anymore. But, yeah,
Okay. So you
yeah.
don't know whether he's still working or not, as in for a living.
One would doubt it, but yeah, yeah.
Fair enough.
Anyway,
Okay.
that's my parting thought.
Okay. Any comments and feedback are of course is of course much appreciated. The email address is feedback@linuxinlaws.eu.
Hmm.
And with that, if there's no other topics to discuss on the subject, we might as well do the proxies.
Okay. Go ahead.
Martin, now do you have a pox?
I have a pox. I don't know if it's a
Excellent.
pox or not. It's the weather really in the UK.
Now we go. Here we go again.
Which is our
The English,
usual.
the,
Yes.
the English residents complain about the weather. No, Martin,
Yes.
let me double check. Actually, the temperature has broken the record of 21.5 degrees as in Celsius, as in centigrade in the UK,
Oh yeah. Okay.
and that would be a reason for complaining. Of course, I get it.
No, it's the end of the world. It's the trains don't work and the tarmac's melting and schools have to close. This is what happens.
I mean, why shouldn't Britain be any different from Germany? I wonder in that case, because trains don't work either, and schools are not on a break. So no worries.
Irrespective of the temperature.
Exactly, Martin. Exactly.
Very true. Very true.
So no worries.
Yes. Yeah. So that was my pox or antipox.
Antipox. Speaking of antipoxes, I have one too. It's
Oh
the
yeah.
HPA episode 3631.
Oh,
And Ken, this is for you if you're listening, and I'm sure you are.
36, 31.
Yes, people check it out on Hacker Public Radio. It's actually the community news for June 2022,
Uh-huh.
where Ken and Dave are bitterly complaining about the audio quality. But
Oh.
people, if to get the following comment, you have to listen to the show, and please do. I fully recommend listening to this.
Yeah, what comment,
Where
sorry?
the comment was actually that the audio quality of a podcast called Inlaws.eu could be improved.
Ah.
Whereas Dave and Ken were apparently sitting in a laundry saloon, for want of a better word, because you could hear you could hear the washing machine spinning in the background quite clearly. Never mind the other audio impact. So Ken and Dave, I'm just putting a leg now. Full disclosure. There's an old German saying that translates into something called if you're sitting in the glass house, don't throw stones. And it comes close in that regard.
We have something with pot and kettle in the UK, I think.
Exactly. This is what calling a kettle a pot or something vice versa, right?
No, the kettle calling the pot black. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Martin.
You're welcome.
And but on the same note, needless to say, full credits have to go to Hacker Public Radio for hosting us.
Definitely.
Yes, very important.
Yep.
Ken, Dave, and friends as in HPR admins, disregard that joke. You're doing a brilliant job, and we love you. Very important. On to the Poxies, as in the picks of the week. Mine is now actually called The Bad Guys. It's a movie. Funny enough, you've seen this.
I meant to watch it. I haven't seen it yet.
Martin, please do. If you want to have lava too, that's the thing to go. And without revealing too much here, it's a bunch of crooks deciding to give it another shot, but kind of from after the conversion, let's put it this way, in terms of they have done enough evil stuff and now they want to do some good stuff. It's an animated movie. But it's not kid stuff. Let's be clear on this. It's like rather targeted at an adult audience, but it's very funny, especially the way it's portrayed, and the scripting is just beautiful. And I really liked it. Details, of course, will be in the show notes.
It is a U, by the way. So
it is what?
A U.
It's a U. As in, it's even safe for you to watch.
In rating, so
yes. It's not even PG, it's just you. Okay, fair enough. It could have been me, so I don't know. But not to worry about this, just watch it. Yes. No, it's quite safe, but probably being a 6-year-old, you won't get the majority of the jokes, let's put it this way.
Very good.
But it's a fun movie for kids of all ages, let's put it this way. Fair enough.
Okay. Excellent.
And with that, people, thanks for listening.
This is the Linux In-Laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for the song Solid Market, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.